Hey everyone, and welcome back to Breathe Easy. I'm so excited you're here today because we're diving into something that is truly changing the game for respiratory therapists, and little notes were placed in our Eastern Carolina Respiratory Conference today. Today's episode is all about electrical impedance tomography, or EIT, and specifically the Temple Enlight 2100 system. Now, I know what you're thinking. Electrical impedance tomography? That sounds complicated. But stick with me because by the end of this episode, you're going to see why this technology is a total game changer for how we monitor and protect patients' lungs. Think about it. We've been managing ventilators for years, relying on numbers such as tidal volumes, plateau pressures, compliance, reviewing monitoring values such as saturation, and those are great, don't get me wrong. But here's the thing. None of those numbers tell us where the air is actually going inside the lungs. Are we ventilating the good lung tissue, or are we distending one region while the other stays collapsed? We've been flying a little blind, and EIT is about to turn on the lights. So whether you're brand new to EIT or you've heard the buzz and want to really understand it, this episode's for you. We're going to break it down, what it is, how it works, and what it can and can't do, and how one day, hopefully, we'll be able to use it at the bedside to make smarter, faster decisions for our patients. Let's get into it. Before we jump into the science and the tech, let's talk a second about why we're here. What's the purpose of this whole episode? Simply put, this research is new and emerging. We're here to demystify EIT for respiratory therapists. Electrical impedance tomography sounds intimidating, but I promise you, hopefully, by the time this episode ends, you're going to feel confident about understanding some of it and even thinking about how we could utilize it in the future. I've structured this episode to kind of walk you through everything step by step. First, we'll cover why it matters, the clinical problem it can solve. Then we'll get into the foundations, what it actually is, and how does the Temple system work. And after that, we'll put EIT in context, how it compares to CT and what it is not, because that's just as important. Then we'll dive into monitoring tools, the advanced applications like PEEP titration, and wrap it all up in some real-world ICU case examples. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's get into it. Okay, so let's set the stage here. Why are we talking about this? Why does it matter for us as respiratory therapists currently as it is new? Here's the deal. We've been monitoring ventilators for years using the same set of numbers. You know the drill. And we look at those numbers because they're important. Absolutely. But here's the thing. What's been bugging clinicians for so long, none of those numbers tell you where the air is actually going inside the lungs. You're getting a global picture, but you have no idea what's happening regionally. And that's a big problem, especially with the kinds of patients we see in the ICU. Think about it. Your ARDS patients, your pneumonia patients, your patients with obesity-related atelectasis or unilateral lung disease, these lungs are not uniform. They're heterogeneous. One region might be collapsed while the other is being overdistended, and we've basically been guessing about that. We say things like the dependent lung is probably collapsed, but we don't actually know that. We're assuming, or they have poor lung compliance. That's where EIT comes in and completely changes the conversation. With EIT, we actually can see how the ventilation is being distributed in the lungs in real time, breath by breath, right at the bedside. No radiation, no transporting patients down to CT, just continuous live visualization of what the lungs are doing. And the Temple device is designed specifically for this. It's not a one and done diagnostic test. It's continuous lung monitor that sits at the bedside and gives you ongoing insight about your patient's lungs, responding to everything you're doing. Change the PEEP, you can see the effect. Reposition the patient, you can see the effect. You can watch what happens in real time, and it's incredibly powerful. So today we're going to break it down, all of this into plain language. We'll talk about what it can do, what it can't, and just realistic expectations, because this is just as important, and how respiratory therapists practically bring in this into our workflows in the future. And while our focus is on the adult population in this podcast, it's worth knowing that this technology extends to pediatric and neonatal patients too, and it's FDA approved. So let's dig in. All right, now we're getting to the good stuff, the foundations. This is where we build your understanding from the ground up. In this section, we're going to cover two big things. First, what EIT actually is as a technology, and I'm talking about functional lung imaging, with a really important distinction we'll get into. And second, how the Enlight system specifically works, the belt, impedance measurements, and that color mapping that turns the electrical signals into something you can actually see and interpret at the bedside. Think of it as your EIT 101. Even if you've heard the term before, this is going to give you that solid foundation to build on. Let's break it down. Okay, let me explain this in a way that actually makes sense. EIT is a functional imaging technology, and that word functional is really key here. Unlike a CT or chest x-ray, which show you the structure of the lungs, what they look like anatomically, EIT shows you what the lungs are doing. It's tracking how ventilation is distributed in real time by measuring changes in electrical impedance as air moves in and out of the lung tissue. Here's the cool part. The Enlight generates up to 50 images per second. 50. That means you're not looking at a snapshot. You're watching a live movie of your patient's ventilation. You see the dynamic changes happening breath by breath, which is incredibly valuable in an ICU where things change in minutes. Now, these images you see on the screen use a color scale. Dark blue typically means less ventilated regions, and as you move toward lighter colors, and the white, which indicate more ventilation, so at a glance you can identify what areas of the lung are getting air and which are not. You can spot these heterogeneous lung tissue, asymmetry, and you exactly see how the lungs respond when you make the change. And here's what sets it apart. There's no radiation involved. Absolutely zero. And it's done continuously at the bedside. You don't have to transport a patient anywhere. It's not a one-time test you order and wait for results. It's ongoing, real-time monitoring, and that's fundamentally different way of thinking about this lung assessment tool and when we assess and evaluate our patients. And it's a game changer for how we're going to manage these patients in the future. Now, let's get into the nuts and bolts of how this thing actually works, because understanding the mechanics helps you use it better, troubleshoot things when things aren't quite looking right. So, the Enlight 2100 by Temple uses an electrode belt that goes around the patient's chest, around the thorax. So, this belt contains about 32 surface electrodes. What they do is introduce tiny imperceptible electrical currents. We're talking so small the patient doesn't feel anything. And they measure the voltage differences that come back. Here's the science behind it. As you know, your patient breathes in. Lungs fill with air. And air is a poor conductor of electricity. So the electrical impedance basically is the resistance to that current. It goes up during inspiration, and when the patient breathes out air, leaves the lungs, impedance goes down. The Enlight system by Temple captures these impedance variations and processes them into a ventilation distribution map. And that map uses a standardized color scale so you can easily eyeball quickly which regions are getting more or less ventilation. It's intuitive once you get used to it. Now, a couple of practical things you need to know. The belt placement matters a lot. Good skin contact is essential for accurate signal acquisition, and the device actually has built-in indicators that will alert you if there's poor electrode contact or the signal quality issues, which is super helpful. And here's something really neat. This platform isn't just for adults. Yeah, the same system works for pediatric and neonatal patients too. You just select the appropriate belt size. So whether you're an adult, working with peds, or neonates, this technology adapts to your patient population and is FDA approved. All right, everyone, so that's a wrap on today's episode. This is going to be a series, surprise, and what a journey we're beginning to take together. We started from the ground up, what EIT actually is and how the Enlight turns impedance signals into a real-time lung image, and why that matters so much when you're standing at the bedside of a critically ill patient. So next time you walk into a room or with a critically ill patient, you're utilizing and just wish you had something like this monitoring tool, would you think about what this could look like in the future for all of us in respiratory therapy and how this could keep our patients breathing easy? Stay tuned for episode next week, continuing our current series.